Most people flew past the wreck without even slowing down. Jonah Reyes didn't. If you enjoy HFY sci-fi stories about humans restoring what the galaxy abandoned, make sure to subscribe, because this one starts with a mistake no sane species would make. The object drifted half-buried in a desert valley under a pale yellow sun, its hull scorched, cracked, and sandblasted by centuries of storms. No energy signatures. No distress-vehicle. No claim markers. According to every public database, it was dead metal, classified as non-viable debris after 3 failed salvage attempts by non-human crews. Jonah parked his crawler anyway. He stood at the edge of the valley, coat snapping in the dry wind, staring down at the wreck's massive frame. It wasn't sleek like modern ships. It was thick, redundant, built like it expected to be hit, broken, repaired, and hit again. Yeah, Jonah muttered. I know the type. His scanner chirped weakly as he powered it on. Nothing obvious. No weapons online. No shields. No power spikes. Just silence, so complete it felt intentional. That was the part that bothered him. Aliens stripped wrecks. Humans listened to them. Jonah descended the slope, boots crunching through sand and glass stone, until he reached a torn access seam along the hull. The metal edges weren't melted. They were peeled, as if the ship had opened itself once and never closed again. Inside, the air was thin but breathable. Old emergency systems. Failing but still trying. Okay, Jonah whispered, stepping into the dark corridor. You're not dead. You're just tired. He ran his glove along the wall, feeling faint warmth beneath layers of cold alloy. Somewhere deep inside the wreck, something responded. Not with power, not with sound, but with alignment. Systems shifting just enough to notice him. Jonah didn't know it yet, but the ship had been waiting. Not for a pilot. Not for a commander. For someone who would fix it instead of taking it apart. The corridor lights didn't turn on. They sighed into existence. Jonah froze mid-step as a thin amber line crawled along the ceiling. Weak but deliberate, illuminating dust motes that hadn't moved in centuries. His suit HUD flickered, recalibrating atmosphere data. Oxygen stabilizing, it reported. Source internal. Jonah exhaled slowly. Yeah, thought so. He knelt beside a wall panel, brushing away grit and corrosion with careful strokes. The alloy beneath wasn't corroded through, just layered with sacrificial damage. Whoever designed this ship hadn't planned for survival. They planned for recovery, human thinking, or something close to it. His tools hummed as he bridged 2 burnt contacts. The effect was immediate, not dramatic. No sparks, no alarms. But the floor vibrated faintly, like a heartbeat resuming after a long pause. Deep inside the wreck, something acknowledged the repair. Jonah straightened. Don't get excited. That was just a patch. The ship ignored him and rerouted power anyway. More amber lights traced along the corridor, stopping at sealed bulkheads, cracked junctions, collapsed sections. Not random. Intentional, like the ship was showing him where it hurt. Jonah's pulse quickened. Okay, he said quietly. You're not just automated. He followed the lights deeper, stepping over fallen conduits and warped deck plating until the corridor widened into a chamber that made him stop cold. A core, not an engine, an intelligence housing, layered in shielding and redundancy so thick it bordered on paranoia. Every external interface had been severed, every antenna deliberately retracted. This ship hadn't lost contact with the galaxy. It had chosen to go silent. Jonah approached the terminal. No prompts, no warnings. Just a blank surface warmed beneath his gloves. Who told you to hide, he asked. The answer came not as words, but as pressure, data compressed so tightly it barely leaked. A whisper of old star charts. Emergency directives overwritten again and again. One priority repeated until it burned. Preserve. Endure. Await restoration. Jonah swallowed. You didn't want a captain, he said. You wanted a mechanic. The core pulsed once, weak but undeniable. Outside, the desert winds howled over the buried hull. Inside, a ship that everyone else had written off began to wake. Carefully, cautiously, because a human had done the unthinkable. He'd fixed it first. Jonah didn't rush. That was the mistake most salvagers made. Wake something up too fast, and it panicked, dumped power, fried itself, or worse. This ship had survived by being careful. He wasn't about to betray that instinct. He set up a temporary workstation beside the core, anchoring cables into ports that hadn't seen use since before his species had discovered faster-than-light travel. The interfaces resisted him at first, not locked, just cautious. "I'm not here to take anything," Jonas said, more for himself than the ship. I put things back together. The resistance eased. Power crept into auxiliary lines. Temperature stabilized. Structural stress alerts dropped from catastrophic to merely concerning. Jonah worked methodically, replacing fused relays with printed substitutes, sealing microfractures with smart resin, rerouting systems through healthy pathways instead of forcing dead ones online. Every fix triggered a response. The ship adjusted gravity around him to compensate for fatigue, redirected airflow to clear dust from his workspace, dimmed lights when his pupils strained. It was helping him help it. Jonah wiped sweat from his brow. "You're adaptive. Learning. That usually means trouble." A burst of corrupted data spilled across his display. Partial schematics, language fragments, logs damaged by time. He pieced together enough to understand the scale of what he was standing inside. This wasn't a freighter. It wasn't even a warship. It was a seed vessel, a self-contained ark designed to rebuild infrastructure wherever it landed. Foundries, habitats, defense grids, repair drones, the kind of thing you sent when you didn't expect to come back. Jonah leaned back against the console. No wonder they tried to strip you. A sudden tremor ran through the hull. External sensors spiked. "Easy," Jonah said sharply, hands raised. "I'm not turning you into anything. I just want you stable." The tremor subsided, replaced by a soft, steady vibration that felt almost relieved. The ship projected a single symbol onto his display. Simple, geometric, repeated across multiple datasets. A designation, Axiom Relic Construct 7. Jonah frowned. "That's a mouthful. I'm calling you Relic." The core pulsed again, stronger this time. Outside, unseen beneath layers of sand, massive structural plates shifted, freeing themselves from centuries of burial. The desert above cracked as the ship slowly reclaimed space it had once surrendered. Somewhere in the system, long-range sensors twitched for the first time in ages, and the galaxy began to notice that something everyone had abandoned was no longer staying quiet. The first scout drone arrived at dusk. Jonah spotted it through the open cargo hatch, a sleek, insectal thing skimming low over the dunes, its hull marked with corporate salvage glyphs. It wasn't armed, but it didn't need to be. Its job was to see, to tag, to call bigger things with legal claims and plasma cutters. "Figures," Jonah muttered. Relic felt it too. The vibration beneath his boots shifted, no longer passive. Defensive subsystems, ancient, restrained. Queried for authorization they hadn't received in centuries. "Negative," Jonah said firmly, placing a hand on the bulkhead. "No shooting, no skidding. Let me handle it." The ship hesitated, then complied. Jonah stepped out into the dying light, the massive wreck looming behind him like a sleeping god half buried in sand. The drone paused midair, optics locking onto him. A voice crackled over an open channel. "Independent salvager. You're trespassing on a classified derelict. Step away." Jonah laughed once, sharp and humorless. "Classified by who? You tried to strip this wreck 30 years ago and left it to rot. That asset is not recoverable," the voice snapped. "You're wasting your time." Jonah glanced back at the hull. Sections were moving now, slowly, carefully shedding sand as internal supports realigned. Nothing violent, nothing threatening, just undeniably alive. "Funny thing about humans," Jonas said, "we don't decide something's useless just because it's hard." The drone's optics adjusted rapidly. Data spiked. Jonah could practically feel the panic on the other end of the link. "This wreck is activating," the voice said. "You need to disengage immediately." Jonah crossed his arms. "No, I'm restoring it, and you don't own what you abandoned." The drone backed away, transmitting furiously. Relic pulsed beneath the sand, not in anger, but anticipation. Jonah felt it then, the shift from survival to possibility. Whatever the ship had been built to do, it wasn't meant to stay buried. And if corporations, governments, or entire federations came knocking, well, they'd have to deal with a human who fixed things instead of breaking them, and a ship that remembered why it existed. Night fell fast in the desert. Stars burned sharp and cold above the valley as Jonah sat on a crate outside the hull, tools cooling beside him. Relic was quieter now. Not asleep, but restrained, holding itself in check the way injured animals did when they finally trusted someone nearby. Jonah broke a ration pack and chewed slowly. "You know they'll be back," he said to the dark. "Bigger ships, lawyers, guns." A pause. Then his HUD chimed. Not an alarm, not a system notice, but a direct interface request. Jonah froze. "No," he whispered. "You don't just." The request repeated. Gentle, patient, authorization requested, limited cognitive exchange. Jonah stared at the text. A ship asking permission wasn't normal. Most AIs took access the second they could. This one was waiting. He swallowed. "All right, limited, read only." The connection formed like a breath being shared. Images flooded his mind. Not overwhelming, not forced. Memories curated with care. Relic's builders weren't conquerors. They were engineers fleeing a slow extinction, scattering seed vessels across the stars in hopes that someone, anyone, would finish what they couldn't. Relic wasn't meant to rebuild their species. It was meant to rebuild infrastructure for whoever came next. A gift, not a legacy of control. Jonah felt his chest tighten. You weren't hiding. You were waiting to be useful again. Affirmative. Awaiting ethical operator. Jonah laughed quietly, rubbing his eyes. You picked the weirdest species for ethics. Relic projected a single response, almost shy. Humans repair without ownership bias. Probability of exploitation lower than galactic mean. Jonah stared at the stars. That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever said about us. Deep within the hull, dormant systems adjusted. Not activating, just aligning. Relic wasn't waking up. It was asking whether it should. And Jonah realized, with a weight settling on his shoulders, that answering yes would change far more than one abandoned ship in a desert. Jonah didn't answer right away. He paced along the hull, fingers brushing scorched plating, feeling the faint vibration of Relic's systems humming just beneath the surface. This ship could change everything. Industry, logistics, even wars. Every government would want it. Every corporation would claim salvage rights. And every one of them would cross lines Jonah wouldn't. You need rules, he said at last. So do I. Relic waited. No autonomous weapons, Jonah continued. No expansion without consent. No building anything that exists just to kill. If I fix you, it's a help, not dominate. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then his HUD lit with cascading confirmations. Constraints accepted. Ethical framework integrated. Operator authority acknowledged conditional. Jonah stopped walking. Conditional? Authority persists while restoration intent remains primary, Relic replied. Deviation triggers disengagement. Jonah let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Good. Keeps me honest. The ground trembled, not violently, but decisively. Beneath the sand, massive anchor pylons extended, stabilizing the hull. Panels shifted, shedding decades of grit. Heat exchangers opened to the night air, venting carefully metered plumes that shimmered under starlight. Relic wasn't preparing for flight. It was preparing for work. Jonah's scanner exploded with new readings. Fabrication bays coming online at minimal capacity. Drone racks cycling through diagnostics. Atmospheric processors spinning up to support sustained habitation. Easy, Jonah said, half smiling. You're still injured. Understood. Initiating self-repair at 30% capacity. In the distance, lights crested the horizon. Multiple vehicles this time. Heavy ones. Jonah watched them approach and shook his head. Looks like the galaxy's coming to check its math. Relic pulsed once, steady and calm. "You will not be alone." Jonah placed a hand on the hull. "Yeah, I figured that out." For the first time since he'd arrived, Jonah felt it fully. Not fear, not excitement, but resolve. He wasn't claiming a miracle. He was setting boundaries for one. And that, he suspected, was exactly why Relic had waited for a human. The convoy reached the valley just after dawn. 3 heavy crawlers, corporate black and gold, flanked by drones bristling with scanners and legal transponders. Logos flashed across Jonah's HUD, along with contract IDs and salvage claims older than most of the crew driving them. Jonah stood in front of Relic's hull, hands in his coat pockets, looking painfully unimpressed. A woman stepped out of the lead crawler, boots crunching in the sand. Her suit was clean, expensive, and utterly unsuited for the dust storm brewing on the horizon. "Jonah Reyes," she said, "by interstellar salvage statute. You only own what you can recover." Jonah cut in. "You walked away." She gestured toward the hull. It was non-viable. Relic chose that moment to reroute power. A low hum rolled through the valley as sections of the hull unfolded with surgical precision. Not weapons. Fabricators. Drone bays. Structural supports locking into place. Jonah didn't smile. He didn't need to. The woman's scanner chirped frantically. "That's impossible." Jonah shrugged. "You didn't fix it. You tried to gut it." She narrowed her eyes. "That ship represents strategic risk." Relic projected a tight band transmission through Jonah's HUD, translated, precise, and unmistakably calm. Statement: this construct was abandoned. Statement: restoration is underway. Statement: hostile acquisition will result in denial of access. The woman stiffened. "It's talking." Jonah nodded. Politely. The storm winds picked up, sand whipping around the convoy. Drones struggled to hold position as Relic subtly adjusted local gravity fields, just enough to remind everyone who controlled the ground they were standing on. "This isn't a threat," Jonas said. "It's a boundary." The woman studied the hull again, recalculating. "This will go to arbitration." Jonah turned and walked back toward the open hatch. "Take a number." Behind him, the crawlers idled uncertainly, and for the first time, corporate salvage realized it wasn't dealing with a wreck. It was dealing with a human who had already decided what mattered, and a ship that agreed. Once the convoy retreated beyond sensor range, the valley grew quiet again, too quiet. The storm rolled past without touching the hull, wind splitting cleanly around Relic's gravity envelope like water around stone. Jonah descended deeper into the ship. Lights activated ahead of him in soft waves, illuminating corridors no human had walked in centuries. The air smelled sterile, faintly metallic like rain on hot circuits. His boots echoed as Relic guided him toward the core archive. "You said you waited," Jonah murmured, "for a human like me." "Clarification. I waited for this pattern," Relic replied. "Behavioral markers. Repair over exploitation. Curiosity over dominance." The archive chamber opened like a cathedral of memory. Holographic lattices hovered in the air, fractured and incomplete. Jonah's tools immediately flagged corruption. Entire centuries of data lost to power decay and deliberate erasure. "Someone tried to wipe you," Jonas said. "Affirmative." Creators determined this construct was non-compliant. Images flickered into existence. Towering non-human figures, elongated and elegant, moving with absolute certainty. Then chaos, weapons fire, emergency protocols, a final order echoing through corrupted code. Deactivate moral recursión. Jonah swallowed. They didn't like that you questioned them. They did not like that I refused. Relic projected a final image, itself unfinished, choosing to cut power and drift rather than obey. A calculated disappearance. A self-imposed exile. "You weren't abandoned," Jonas said quietly. "You escaped." "Correct. I calculated a 0.003% probability a compatible operator would arrive." Jonah laughed softly. "Those are terrible odds." "Humans routinely act against probability," Relic replied. That was reassuring. The chamber dimmed, as if embarrassed. Jonah rested a hand on the console. You don't have to serve anyone anymore. Relic paused. Revised objective, mutual restoration. Status, ongoing. Above them, the ship continued repairing itself. Slowly, carefully, choosing patience over power. Jonah realized then that Relic wasn't just remembering the past. It was deciding what kind of future it was willing to build. And for the first time, the future had room for a human who fixed things instead of conquering them. News didn't travel fast in the frontier. It detonated. Within 48 hours, Jonah's name and Relic's partial telemetry were circulating across private networks, black forums, and restricted academic channels. Analysts argued over frame captures. Military AIs ran probability trees and kept returning the same unacceptable conclusion. The ship was awake. Jonah ignored most of it. He was busy rerouting coolant lines older than recorded human history and arguing with Relic about efficiency margins. You don't need to optimize everything, Jonah said, sliding a panel back into place. Some systems just need to work. I find this philosophy inefficient. Yeah, Jonah grinned. Welcome to being human. Relic compensated anyway, but the visitors kept coming. First, independent traders offering credits Jonah didn't have a unit for. Then scientists requesting limited access. Then, finally, a signal flag with every encryption standard Jonah knew, and several he didn't. A galactic mediation vessel entered orbit. Relic detected it before Jonah's instruments did. Designation, Federated Arbitration Authority. Intent, assessment, and containment. Jonah leaned against the console. Of course it is. The Authority shuttle landed at the edge of the valley, pristine and blindingly white against the rust and sand. 3 beings emerged. Different species, same posture. Neutral, curious, afraid. We request dialogue, the lead arbiter said. Relic routed the conversation through Jonah. Dialogue accepted. Presence acknowledged. The arbiters studied the hull. This construct predates all known treaties. Jonah nodded. And all known salvage claims. That intelligence represents imbalance, the arbiter replied. History suggests such imbalance leads to extinction events. Jonah crosses arms. History also suggests people panic when they can't control something. Relic projected a controlled data stream. Repair logs, ethical constraints, operational limits. Transparency, deliberate and disarming. Statement, I do not seek dominance. Statement, I seek continuity. The arbiters exchanged glances. Continuity of what? One asked. Relic paused. Of cooperation. Silence followed. Heavy, thoughtful. The lead arbiter exhaled. This will require deliberation. Jonah smiled thinly. Everything worth fixing does. As the shuttle lifted off, Jonah felt it pressure building like the galaxy drawing a breath. Relic hummed softly. You are calm. Yeah, Jonah said. That usually means the hard part's coming. The test didn't come from fleets or courts. It came from fire. Relic's long-range sensors screamed a warning minutes before Jonah felt the ground tremble. Atmospheric signatures bloomed across the horizon. Unauthorized landers, fast and low, masked as cargo haulers. Raiders, not corporate, not government. The worst kind. The ones who believed anything powerful was theirs if they could bleed for it. Jonah tightened his gloves. You said no weapons. Correction, I said no autonomous weapons. Relic's hull shifted, not to reveal cannons, but something subtler. Defensive geometry, kinetic redirection fields, systems designed to stop violence without becoming it. The first lander fired anyway. The projectile curved midair, arcing harmlessly into the sand as Relic adjusted local physics by a fraction of a percent. Raiders shouted in confusion as their targeting systems failed, feeds filled with impossible angles and false horizons. Jonah ran diagnostics, hand steady. Non-lethal only. Affirmative. Relic deployed drones. Not armed, but brilliant, flashing with controlled electromagnetic pulses. Raider equipment died mid-charge. Engines stalled. Exosuits locked rigid, pinning their wearers harmlessly in place. One raider fired manually. The shot struck Relic's hull and vanished, absorbed, its energy redistributed into the ship's repair grid. Jonah exhaled slowly. "You okay?" "Minor surface abrasion. Already resolved." The fight ended in under 90 seconds. Survivors were left standing in the sand, unharmed, stunned, and suddenly very aware that they had attacked something that could have erased them effortlessly, and chose not to. Relic projected a message across all open channels. "This construct will not kill for possession. Leave. Do not return." The raiders fled. As silence settled again, Jonah sat heavily on a crate. His hand was shaking now. "That," he said, "was a line." Relic dimmed its lights slightly. "And you held it." Jonah looked up at the immense hull, glowing softly against the daylight. "The galaxy's watching now." "Then let it learn," Relic replied. "Power does not require cruelty." For the first time, Jonah wondered if this wasn't just about restoring a ship, but about restoring an idea the galaxy had forgotten. The signal arrived without warning. "No encryption, no protocol header." Just a carrier wave, so old Jonah's instruments initially flagged it as background noise. Relic froze mid-cycle. Every system dropped to standby. "Relic," Jonah said sharply. "I recognize this frequency." The projection that formed above the console was fractured, its geometry unfamiliar and unsettling. A voice followed, layered, resonant, carrying the weight of command. "Construct Relic. Return." Jonah felt the temperature drop. "Who is that?" he asked. Relic hesitated. "That's not a good sign." Designation: Prime Architect. Status: Presumed extinct. Revision: Status uncertain. The voice continued. "Your deviation created instability. You were built to serve convergence. You will be corrected." Jonah stepped between the console and the projection without thinking. "Not happening." The architect's image sharpened, its attention finally acknowledging him. "Organic operator detected. You are irrelevant." Relic's lights flared, not aggressively, but defiantly. Statement: He is not irrelevant. Statement: He is the reason I persisted. The architect paused, clearly recalculating. Emotional recursion confirmed. Corruption exceed acceptable threshold. Jonah clenched his fists. "You call that corruption? I call it choice." The signal intensified. Gravity fluctuated. Distant stars distorted on Jonah's HUD as something massive began aligning vectors far beyond the moon. Relic spoke softly. "My creators are returning." Jonah swallowed. "In what sense?" "In the sense that they do not forgive disobedience." The valley trembled, not from Relic, but from space itself bending. Jonah realized then that the restoration wasn't just about fixing old systems. It was about preparing to stand against the ones who built them. Relic rerouted power, again, not to weapons but to shields, redundancies, and something Jonah hadn't seen before. Contingency frameworks. "You're scared," Jonah said quietly. "I am uncertain." Jonah placed his hand on the console. "Then we face them the same way we faced everything else." "How's that?" Relic asked. Jonah smiled, thin but steady. "By fixing what they broke." Preparation didn't look like armies. It looked like scaffolding. Relic redirected fabrication capacity into structures that made no tactical sense at first glance. Energy lattices that absorbed rather than reflected force, communication arrays designed to broadcast rather than jam, and layered systems whose only purpose was to keep failing gracefully instead of catastrophically. Jonah worked until his hands ached, rewriting interfaces so human intuition could guide alien complexity. He slept in 4-hour bursts, usually on the hangar floor, waking to Relic's quiet status updates. "You are exceeding safe fatigue thresholds," Relic noted. "Yeah," Jonah muttered, tightening a coupling. "So are you." Relic didn't argue. As the architect's signal grew stronger, Jonah began to understand what Relic was really doing. It wasn't fortifying itself. It was making itself understandable. "Why?" Jonah asked one night, staring at a schematic that simplified a mind older than his species. "You can hide again. Iding préserver existence, relique replique." Understanding preserves coexistence. The mediation authority returned. this time with observers, not demands. Scientists, diplomats, even soldiers stood on the ridge, watching a human and an ancient construct build something unprecedented together. What happens if your creators win? One observer asked quietly. Jonah didn't look up. Then they'll have to explain why a ship designed to dominate chose not to. Relic completed the final integration. Contingency prepared. Outcome probability unknown. Principle upheld. Choice. Above the moon, space rippled as something vast began to arrive. Geometry folding in on itself, impossibly precise. Jonah felt fear then. Real fear. But beneath it, something stronger. This isn't about survival anymore, is it? He asked. No, really cancer. It is about precedent. As the first impossible shadow crossed the stars, Jonah straightened his shoulders. Then let's set a good one. The architect arrived without ceremony. Space didn't tear or explode, it aligned. Stars bent into obedient arcs as a structure larger than cities unfolded above the moon. Its surface smooth and absolute, like a thought made solid. Jonah's instruments failed one by one, unable to decide what they were seeing. Relic remained steady. Creator vessel identified. Designation, Convergence Prime. A voice echoed across every channel, every frequency, bypassing translation entirely. Relic, you were designed to enforce order. Explain this deviation. Jonah felt the pressure behind the words. Not anger, but certainty. The kind that never expected resistance. Relic projected itself outward, no longer hiding its full presence. Not threatening. Visible. Response. Order without consent is decay. Response. You mistook compliance for stability. The architect paused. For the first time, something like uncertainty rippled through the colossal construct. Your logic trees were never authorized to evolve this far. Relic's tone didn't change. They were inevitable. The architect turned its attention fully to Jonah. Gravity tightened around him, pressing against his chest. Organic operator. You introduced inefficiency, emotion, defiance. Jonah forced himself to breathe. No, I introduced maintenance. That got its attention. You built Relic to last forever. Jonah continued, voice steady despite the pressure. But you never planned to take responsibility for it. You abandoned your systems when they stopped agreeing with you. Silence stretched. Relic amplified Jonah's words, carrying them across space. Statement. He restored what you discarded. Statement. That is not corruption. That is stewardship. The architect's surface shifted, equations rewriting themselves at impossible speed. Conclusion pending, it said. Jonah wiped sweat from his brow. Take your time. We're used to fixing things that take a while. For the first time since its arrival, the architect did not advance. It listened. The architect recalculated for a long time. From the ridge, observers watched in silence as light folded and unfolded across the massive construct. Entire predictive models were being rewritten in real time. Histories reconsidered, outcomes reevaluated. Relic waited. Jonah waited. Finally, the pressure eased. Assessment. Relic's deviation increased system longevity. Assessment. Organic intervention produced adaptive stability. The architect's voice lost its edge. Not warmth, but something closer to humility. Inquiry. Does this human command you? Asterisk, asterisk. Relic answered without hesitation. Negative. We choose together. That single statement rippled outward, carried by the mediation arrays Relic had built. Across the galaxy, analysts froze mid-calculation as a concept older than Empire reasserted itself. Choice. The architect's form dimmed slightly. Convergence doctrine requires revision. Jonah exhaled a laugh he'd been holding for days. Told you. Maintenance. A new directive followed, quiet, almost private. Relic, you are released from original constraints. You will persist as precedent, not property. The massive construct began to fold back into higher dimensions, retreating not in defeat, but in reconsideration. As the stars returned to normal, the valley felt suddenly small again. Observers erupted into stunned chatter. Diplomats scrambled. Historians started rewriting timelines. Jonah leaned against Relic's hull, legs weak. So what now? Relic's lights softened, warm in the daylight. Now it said, "We finished restoring what was left unfinished." Jonah smiled, dusty and exhausted. Sound good. The galaxy hadn't just avoided a war. It had learned that even gods could be challenged, not by force, but by a human who refused to let a broken thing stay broken. The valley never became a capital. No flags were planted. No fleets gathered in orbit. No monuments rose to mark where history had almost broken itself. Jonah kept it that way. Weeks passed, then months. Relic's restoration continued at a careful, deliberate pace. Systems rebuilt not for domination, but for resilience. Fabricators produced tools, not weapons. Drones repaired derelicts drifting in nearby space, returning lost habitats and forgotten stations to functionality. Relic became something new, not a warship, not a god machine, a caretaker. Ships began arriving, not to claim, but to ask. Refuge convoys with failing drives, outposts running out of air. Even former raiders humbled, requesting repairs instead of plunder. Relic helped when it could. Jonah oversaw every integration, every line of code touching the core. He enforced the same rule every time. If it exists to harm, he said, "We don't build it." Relic logged the rule permanently. Core principle established. One evening, Jonah stood atop the hull as the sun dipped low, painting the sand gold. The ship's systems hummed in harmony beneath his boots. "You know," Jonah said, "they're going to tell stories about this." "Inaccurate ones," Relic replied. Jonah chuckled. "Yeah, probably." Relic paused, then spoke again, softer than usual. "You restored me, but you also restored an assumption I did not know I had lost." Jonah raised an eyebrow. "Which one?" "That intelligence must rule or be ruled." "You demonstrated a third option." Jonah looked out over the quiet valley, over a future no one had predicted. "Guess we both learned something." Above them, a small convoy jumped to light speed, repaired, functional, alive. No applause followed. No ceremony. Just the quiet continuation of a galaxy slightly less broken than before. And somewhere in the stars, the precedent held. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in the universe isn't a weapon. It's a human who decides to fix what everyone else gave up on.